The following is from the Agency for Instructional Technology, AIT.
How to draw, a blank sheet of paper can seem intimidating. In this program, Paul Ringler will introduce you to 4 different ways to begin drawing. Once you know these steps, an empty page will invite you to get started.
Let's begin with light, loose lines. Lines that are following the rhythm and are made in the shape, the general shape, of whatever we intend to draw. Now, these lines may not look very important, but they're very important to the artist. They're the beginning lines. First, they let me establish a contact with the paper without strain, and they give me many lines to pick and choose from later. So they are important. And they are done in a gestural way, which is one of the important approaches to drawing, the language of drawing. And drawing is a language. Now, unlike the written and spoken language, where we start with a distinct word and follow it with distinct words to a complete thought, drawing is different. We start with abstract lines, and sometimes they look meaningless, but then we refine and we adjust and we build them into what we want as a completed picture. Now, that's important to have a beginning approach, in this case, the gestural approach. But there's something else that's important, and that is to know your subject, not just to recognize it, but to know it well and thoroughly. That's very important. Now, if you're drawing a horse in action, then you want to study the motion, the muscles, the legs, the head, and also different modes of motion. Here, notice how the leg raises up there in the hind leg's position. Also notice surface details. Feathers here, the size of them, the shape of them, and the color of them. And if you're drawing plant life, each species has its own distinct shape. Now, why is it important to know your subject? I can draw a general configuration of a horse here without knowing my subject thoroughly. But when I get down to the nitty-gritty, when I get down to refining and adjusting, which is part of the drawing procedure, then I must know how the chest is shaped, how maybe the upper leg is shaped, leading down into the fetlock and an angle off into the hooves, and other parts that I'll use when I refine. That's why you have to know your subject. It's not really to the beginning of your drawing, it's the completing of your drawing. And I'm not concerned with these being called details. They're really not details. I think of the details as the things that come last and that are least important. Now, we learn some things also that help us, guides to measurement. You've probably seen the body drawn by a measurement of heads. The same can apply to a horse. I can take the measurement of an adult horse, a full-grown horse, and use it generally as a measurement from the head to the chest to the body, to the same measurement here to the thickness of the body, to the same measurement from the body down to the fetlock. So those are the reasons we'll study the horse, we learn to see measurements from it, and we also do that with any drawing subject. Now, this is the gestural approach. There are other approaches. Let's look at some other approaches.
Once you know what you want to draw and have studied it, then you are ready to begin your picture. This image demonstrates the 4 ways you can start a drawing. In the upper left-hand corner is an example of the outline or contour approach. Next to it, in the upper right, is a demonstration of the geometric or construction approach. On the lower left is the light and shadow or tonal approach. And finally, on the lower right is the approach Paul first used at the beginning of the program, the rhythm or gestural approach. In the construction approach, you imagine things to be made up of basic geometric shapes, such as blocks, spheres, or cones.
The construction approach is a good approach, especially if you're drawing geometric figures or man-made objects, things that can be dimensioned. However, it can be used to draw figures or animals. That way, we imagine the parts of the body to be geometric. Here I have the rib cage in a block. Here's the hip block seated on the chair. I can bring the upper leg out here and put the lower leg here. And they kind of look like stovepipes, the legs and the arms. But that gives a solid feeling to whatever you're drawing. But it also gives a robot-type feeling, so you got to be careful using this that you don't get your figures too static. It's usually used for a demonstration in art books to help a student understand the parts of the body and how they move. But this demonstration here shows you that it can be used simply in sketching out a figure as an approach to your beginning lines. In looking at this picture, you can see it's loaded with geometric shapes. So it'd be obvious that the approach in making this sketch would be the construction approach. And even on the lower left, the person need not be drawn that way, but here, as you can see, it could be.
The tonal approach encourages you to concentrate on the light and dark areas, or the highlights and shadows, to define the shape of your subject.
The tonal approach is what I call the painter's approach. In this approach, we're working in light and dark areas, representing light and shadow. But in working with this approach, you want to select a side of a pencil, pastel, chalk, or paint, something with which you can make broad strokes. On the left is a tonal study. It's done devoid of detail. If you look closely at the features, the eyes and the nose and the mouth, you'll see that they are suggestions only, but that's enough for the purpose of a study. Now on the lower right, we see what I call a thumbnail rough. These are small preparations before we go to a drawing or a painting. They solve design problems and carry out design principles, but here again, there's no detail.
The gestural approach allows you to use loose circular lines to show the rhythm and the shape of the subject.
The gestural approach is the approach I used at the beginning of the demonstration in drawing a horse. I like to use this approach if you're drawing animals or people. You're working in loose lines, and these lines represent parts of the body. You make lots of them, not worrying about any perfection in line, just following what you feel to be the rhythm and the general shape of whatever you're drawing. And then after you have that, you have a pretty good feel, then you can come around with your contour lines and improve and adjust the parts of the body in this case. I like to use a gestural approach for action pictures because there's so much rhythm in the lines.
The contour approach lets you make a complete outline of your drawing subject.
The contour approach is good when drawing from a model, because if you're drawing from a model, the outline shape is there before you. Of course, you'll need to study it, but you can see the shape and simply draw the outline. Now, the contour or outline approach is important for another reason. It comes into the other three approaches in drawing lines to improve the shapes. I use the contour approach to outline and improve the lines. Also, I can use other approaches mixed with it. None of the approaches have to be used alone. For example, if I place a rider up here, I put the hip block. I may, if I wish, put it in a construction approach. Put a face up here. So you see, within one drawing, all these approaches can be mixed and matched. And even here, the tonal approach. As I work around my drawing, the approach has got me started. Now, one approach, now I come in and can use several of them. I invite you to try some of these approaches, experiment.
Select a nearby subject to draw. First, make an abstract, loose sketch of it using one of the four methods: gestural, geometric, tonal, or outline. Think about the overall general shape. Details are not important at this point. Don't attempt to make a complete drawing. Start several drawings using a different approach each time.
Don't feel that you must be rigid in working with approaches. You need not use one approach alone. You can pick and choose, mix and match, and experiment. Because in drawing, we have really no laws in drawing or in art. We only make suggestions.
With his drawing easily begun, Paul now adds more details. From looking at his developing drawing, you can barely tell that it began as the bundle of lines we first saw in the program. You have seen that you can use different methods to begin a picture. With loose motions, you can imitate the rhythms of your subject using the gestural approach. By looking for blocks and shapes, you can start with the geometric method. Concentrating on the light and dark areas, you can use a tonal approach. And with attention to the contour of the subject, you can use the outline approach. As with any project, drawing is just a series of small steps taken one at a time. Go ahead, make that first mark on that empty page. Drawing with Paul Ringler is produced by the Agency for Instructional Technology in association with the Oklahoma Educational Television Authority.